The mountain rescue training facility buzzed with nervous energy that Tuesday morning. Sarah Chen stood among 23 other candidates, her small frame nearly invisible in the crowd of towering athletes and seasoned climbers. At 5 feet 2 inches, she barely reached most of their shoulders. Her hands, calloused from years of rock climbing, fidgeted with the straps of her worn backpack. The instructor, a gruff man named Marcus Webb with a salt and pepper beard, barked instructions across the training ground. This was the final evaluation for Mountain Rescue Team certification. Only the best would make it through. The course had already weeded out half the original group over the past 6 months. Sarah had worked 3 jobs to afford this training. By day, she taught elementary school. Evenings found her waiting tables at a busy downtown restaurant. Weekends meant stocking shelves at the local outdoor gear shop. Every spare moment and every spare dollar had gone toward this dream. Her apartment walls were covered with maps of mountain ranges and photos of successful rescues. She had studied every manual, practiced every technique until her muscles ached. The other candidates barely noticed her. 3 men stood in a tight cluster near the equipment shed, their voices carrying across the morning air. Jake Morrison, a bulky former college football player, led the group. Beside him stood Derek Chen and Marcus Volt, both experienced climbers with impressive resumes. They had made their opinions about Sarah clear from day one. "Can't believe she's still here," Jake muttered, loud enough for others to hear. His arms crossed over his broad chest as he watched Sarah check her gear. "This isn't a playground. People's lives depend on us." Derek smirked, running a hand through his dark hair. "Probably thinks determination beats physics. Wait until she has to haul a 200-pound injured hiker up a cliff face." Marcus Volt laughed, the sound harsh in the crisp mountain air. "My kid's sister is bigger than her. This is embarrassing for the program." Sarah heard every word. She had heard similar comments for 6 months straight. During rope drills, they questioned her grip strength. During endurance runs, they predicted she would collapse. When she outperformed them in navigation exercises, they attributed it to luck. The constant doubt had become background noise, but it still stung. She finished checking her climbing harness and moved to the practice wall. Her fingers traced familiar routes up the artificial rock face. Climbing had been her sanctuary since childhood, when her father first took her to the local climbing gym. He had been a rescue worker himself, lost to an avalanche when Sarah was 15. His last words to her echoed in her memory constantly. "Size doesn't matter up there, sweetheart. Heart does. Technique does. Never let anyone tell you different." The morning session involved technical rope work and anchor systems. Sarah moved through the exercises with quiet precision. Her knots were perfect, her anchor points secure. She double-checked everything, knowing one mistake would give the doubters ammunition. The instructor nodded approval at her work, but said nothing. Lunch break arrived with gray clouds rolling over the mountain peaks. The candidates scattered across the training ground, forming small groups. Sarah sat alone on a wooden bench, eating a sandwich she had packed before dawn. She reviewed her notes on rescue protocols, her mind already on the afternoon session. "Hey, check it out!" Jake's voice broke through her concentration. He stood with his group about 30 feet away, but his voice projected deliberately. "Little Sarah, studying hard. Maybe she thinks reading about it is the same as doing it." The afternoon brought the main event, the Canyon Edge Challenge. It was the most feared part of the certification. Candidates had to descend into a deep ravine, navigate across rough terrain while carrying a weighted rescue dummy, then climb back up a sheer rock face. The catch was simple and brutal. No safety ropes on the ascent. Only their own skill, strength, and nerves stood between them and a 40-foot fall. The instructors emphasized the point repeatedly. This simulated real rescue conditions where equipment failed or wasn't available. Rescuers needed to know they could rely on their own abilities when everything else went wrong. Several candidates had withdrawn from the program rather than attempt this challenge. 2 had failed it and were sent home. The group gathered at the canyon's edge. Sarah stood near the back, trying to see past the taller candidates. The ravine yawned before them, its rocky walls disappearing into shadows. A cold wind rushed up from below, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. Marcus Webb explained the route one final time. His weather-beaten face was serious. Every word weighted with importance. You go down using standard rappelling technique. Cross the canyon floor to the dummy. It weighs 180. You carry it to the north wall. Then you free climb out. No ropes, no harness on the way up. This wall has been cleared by safety experts. The holds are solid. But you need skill and you need courage. Anyone wants to back out. Now's the time. No shame in knowing your limits. Nobody moved, though Sarah noticed several candidates had gone pale. They drew lots for order. Sarah pulled number 18. She would go near the end, forced to watch 17 others attempt the challenge first. Jake drew number 3, a fact he seemed pleased about. He wanted to set the standard early. The first candidate, a wiry man named Scott, made it look easy. He rappelled down smoothly, hauled the dummy across the rocky floor with steady determination, then scaled the north wall with the confidence of someone who had climbed since childhood. The watching group applauded as he pulled himself over the rim, breathing hard but successful. The second candidate struggled more with the dummy's weight, but made it up. Then came Jake's turn. He shot Sarah a meaningful look before stepping to the edge. His descent was fast, almost reckless. He wanted to show off. The dummy seemed to weigh nothing in his muscular arms as he carried it across the canyon. His free climb up was impressive, using pure upper body strength to power through difficult sections. He topped out with a triumphant shout, flexing for the group. "That's how it's done," he announced, chest heaving. "Next!" The challenges continued. Some candidates made it look easy. Others struggled but persevered. One young woman froze halfway up the wall, overcome by fear. Instructors had to lower a safety rope to bring her down. She sat crying at the edge while medics checked her over. Her certification dream was over. By the time they reached number 18, the afternoon sun was sinking toward the mountains. Long shadows stretched across the canyon. Sarah stepped forward, and the muttering started immediately. "This is going to be a disaster," Derek whispered to Marcus Volt, not bothering to lower his voice much. "Someone have the medical kit ready," Marcus Volt replied with a snicker. Jake stood with his arms crossed, a smug expression on his face. He had planted himself right at the edge where Sarah would have to pass him. As she approached with her rappelling gear, he spoke just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You sure about this, Sarah? It's not too late to admit this is beyond you. No shame in recognizing reality." Sarah met his eyes steadily. "I'm doing this." "Your funeral," Jake shrugged. Then, as Sarah stepped past him toward the edge, he stuck his foot out. The deliberate motion was quick but unmistakable. Sarah's boot caught his ankle. Her arms windmilled as she lost balance at the canyon's rim. For a horrible moment, she teetered on the edge, gravity pulling at her. Then she fell. Gasps erupted from the watching crowd. Sarah plummeted into the ravine, her body disappearing below the rim. The sound of her hitting the sloped wall echoed up, then the sickening tumble of a body bouncing down rocks. "Oh my God!" someone screamed. Jake's smug expression vanished, replaced by shock. His face went white as paper. She just... Derek and Marcus Volt stood frozen, their earlier mockery turning to horror. Marcus Webb was already moving, barking orders into his radio. "Medical emergency. Candidate down in the canyon. Get the rescue team mobilized now." Several instructors grabbed gear and prepared to descend. The other candidates pressed forward, trying to see down into the shadows. 40 feet was enough to kill someone, especially landing on rocks. Everyone knew that. The ravine had been chosen specifically because it was dangerous, meant to test them under real conditions. Jake backed away from the edge, his hands shaking. "It was an accident," he muttered. "Just an accident. She wasn't watching where she was going." But several candidates had seen exactly what happened. Witnesses traded shocked glances. The lead instructor reached the edge with rope equipment, preparing to rappel down for recovery. Everyone expected the worst. A fall like that onto rocks could mean severe injuries, possibly fatal. The training ground had gone deadly quiet, except for urgent radio chatter and the sound of equipment being readied. Then movement caught someone's eye in the canyon below. "Wait!" a female candidate named Rita called out. "Wait! Look!" All eyes turned to the ravine. From the shadows emerged a figure, climbing steadily up the sheer north wall. No ropes, no harness, just hands and feet finding holds in the rock face. It was Sarah. Her face was scraped, blood trickling from a cut above her eyebrow. Her jacket was torn at the shoulder, but she climbed with smooth, economical movements, finding handholds that seemed invisible to others. Her small size became an advantage, allowing her to use tiny ledges and cracks that larger climbers would miss. The watching crowd stood paralyzed with shock. Jake's mouth hung open. Derek and Marcus Volt looked like they had seen a ghost. Sarah didn't rush. She climbed with careful precision, testing each hold before trusting her weight to it. Her breathing was controlled, her focus absolute. She had learned to free climb on these kinds of walls from the time she was 10 years old. Her father had taught her that technique, and balance mattered more than strength. Small climbers could go places big ones couldn't. They just had to be smarter about it. 20 feet up, 30 feet. The crowd remained silent, afraid to breathe. This wasn't supposed to be possible. She had just fallen 40 feet, bounced down a rocky slope, and now she was climbing out without safety equipment like nothing had happened. At 35 feet, Sarah reached a difficult overhang section. She paused, reading the rock, finding the path through. Then she moved in a fluid sequence, her body close to the stone, using balance and footwork rather than trying to muscle through. 40 feet. Her hand reached over the rim. Marcus Webb stepped forward instinctively to help, but Sarah was already pulling herself up. She rolled over the edge and stood, swaying slightly. Blood dripped from her forehead. Her hands were scraped raw, but she was standing. The training ground erupted in stunned chatter. Several candidates started clapping, the sound building into applause. But Sarah wasn't looking at them. Her eyes, hard as the rock she had just climbed, locked onto Jake. He stumbled backward, his earlier bravado completely gone. Sarah walked toward him with slow, deliberate steps. The crowd parted. Marcus Webb moved to intercede, but something in Sarah's expression made him pause. She stopped directly in front of Jake, who now looked terrified. "You pushed me," Sarah said quietly. Her voice carried in the sudden silence. "You actually pushed me." It was," Jake's voice cracked. "An accident. My foot just, I saw it." Rita spoke up from the crowd. He deliberately stuck his foot out. Two other witnesses nodded agreement. Jake's face flushed red, then went pale again. He looked around desperately for support, but his friends Derek and Marcus Volt had taken several steps away from him, wanting no association. Sarah continued staring at him. "You thought I couldn't do this. You thought I was weak, so you decided to prove it by nearly killing me." "Sarah," Marcus Webb interjected, his voice careful, "we need to get you checked by medical. That was a serious fall." Sarah didn't break eye contact with Jake. "I'm fine. I grew up climbing walls harder than that ravine. My father taught me how to fall, how to control it, how to use slopes to break momentum. I've taken worse spills at the climbing gym." "But still," the instructor insisted, "you need evaluation." Finally, Sarah looked away from Jake. She turned to Marcus Webb. "After I finished the challenge, I went down. Now I'm climbing back up properly. I'm completing this certification." The instructor studied Sarah's determined face, then nodded slowly. "All right. But a medic stays here watching you every second. Any sign of dizziness, disorientation, anything, you stop immediately. Understood?" Sarah agreed and walked back to the canyon edge. The crowd watched in awed silence as she checked her rappelling gear with methodical precision. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency despite the scrapes. She tested every carabiner, every connection point. When she was satisfied, she stepped to the rim without hesitation. The descent was textbook perfect. Sarah controlled her rope with smooth confidence, her small frame dropping steadily into the shadowed ravine. She reached the canyon floor and unclipped, then moved to where the weighted rescue dummy lay waiting in the rocky terrain. At 180 pounds, the dummy outweighed Sarah by nearly 40 pounds, but she had prepared for this. She knew she couldn't rely on brute strength. Instead, she used technique. She positioned herself correctly, engaged her core, and lifted with her legs. The dummy came up onto her shoulders in a fireman's carry. Her breathing stayed controlled as she began crossing the uneven canyon floor. Above, the watching candidates leaned over the edge. Even Jake watched, his expression a mixture of guilt and disbelief. Sarah navigated around boulders and over rough patches with careful steps. The weight bore down on her shoulders, but she kept moving. Each step was deliberate. She couldn't afford a twisted ankle or a fall with the dummy. The crossing took her longer than it had taken Jake, but she never faltered. When she reached the north wall, she carefully lowered the dummy to the ground. For a moment, she stood still, catching her breath and preparing mentally for the final challenge. The free climb loomed above her. 40 feet of vertical rock face. No ropes, no safety equipment. Just her and the stone. This was what separated certified mountain rescuers from everyone else. The willingness to trust yourself completely when there was no backup plan. Sarah's father's voice echoed in her memory. When you're climbing without a rope, you don't think about falling. You think about the next hold. Just the next hold. One move at a time. The wall doesn't care how big you are. It only cares if you're smart enough to read it. She stepped to the wall and began climbing. Her movements were poetry. Where Jake had powered through with raw strength, Sarah danced up the rock face using balance and technique. Her small hands found tiny crimps and edges. Her feet placed precisely on small chips of stone. She kept her hips close to the wall, maintaining 3 points of contact at all times. 10 feet up, she paused to read the next section. The route ahead looked blank, but Sarah saw what others missed. A slight depression there, a tiny edge there, a crack just wide enough for fingertips. She moved through the sequence smoothly. 20 feet, below the overhang now. This was where several candidates had struggled. Sarah studied it from below, her breathing calm. She spotted her path and committed. Her right hand reached far right to a good hold. Left foot came up high to a small edge. Right foot smeared against textured rock. Then she rocked up and over, her body moving in one fluid motion. 30 feet. She was in what climbers called the pump zone now, where forearms burned and fingers begged for rest. But Sarah had trained for this. Countless hours at the climbing gym, building endurance in her grip. She shook out one hand at a time at rest positions, keeping blood flowing to her fingers. 35 feet. Nearly there. The final section was vertical, requiring careful attention to foot placement. Sarah methodically worked her way up, testing each hold before committing her weight. Her scraped hands left small blood smears on the rock, but she felt no pain. She was completely focused, in that zone where nothing existed except her and the wall. 40 feet. Her hand reached the rim. This time, when she pulled herself over the edge, the entire group burst into applause. It wasn't polite clapping, it was genuine, thunderous appreciation. Even the instructors were applauding. Sarah stood at the canyon's edge, breathing hard but victorious. Sweat mixed with the blood on her face. Her torn jacket hung off one shoulder. She looked like she had been through battle. In a way, she had. Marcus Webb approached with a genuine smile, something rare on his gruff face. That was exceptional work, Chen. Textbook technique on that free climb. You just demonstrated why skill matters more than size in mountain rescue. The medic rushed over to check Sarah's injuries. The cut on her forehead needed cleaning and butterfly bandages. Her hands needed wrapping. But nothing was broken. No concussion signs, just bumps and scrapes from her fall. She had been incredibly lucky, and her training in how to fall had saved her from serious injury. While the medic worked, other candidates came over to offer congratulations. Rita, who had witnessed Jake's action, squeezed Sarah's shoulder. That was amazing. I've never seen climbing like that. A tall candidate named Marcus Lee shook his head in wonder. I outweigh you by 100 pounds, and I barely made it up that wall. You made it look easy. Twice. Even Derek and Marcus Volt approached awkwardly, offering stiff congratulations. Their earlier mockery had evaporated, replaced by grudging respect. They had seen something undeniable. Size didn't matter up there. Skill did. Jake stood apart from the group, his face ashen. He knew what was coming. Sarah's fall hadn't been an accident, and there had been witnesses. His certification dream was about to end and possibly face worse consequences. Marcus Webb pulled Jake aside as the medic finished with Sarah. The conversation was quiet but intense. Jake's protest grew weaker as the instructor's expression hardened. Two other instructors joined them, and Jake's shoulders slumped in defeat. The remaining challenges were completed before sunset. Sarah performed every task with the same quiet competence she had shown all along. Her injuries didn't slow her down. If anything, her focus seemed sharper. She had something to prove, not to the doubters, but to herself. As the day ended and candidates packed up gear, Marcus Webb called for everyone's attention. The orange sunset painted the mountains in gold and crimson behind him. "Before we dismiss, there's a matter to address," the instructor announced, his voice carrying authority. Jake Morrison has been removed from the certification program, effective immediately. His deliberate endangerment of another candidate is grounds for permanent dismissal. Additionally, this incident will be reported to the Climbing Federation and relevant authorities. Jake stood near the equipment shed, his face burning with shame. Several candidates glared at him with disgust. Endangering fellow rescuers was the worst violation of their code. People in this profession trusted each other with their lives. Jake had shown he couldn't be trusted. Furthermore, Webb continued, "I want to acknowledge what we witnessed today. Sarah Chen demonstrated exceptional skill, courage, and determination. She showed us all why we don't judge rescuers by their size or strength but by their ability and heart. That free climb was one of the finest I've seen in 15 years running this program." More applause erupted. Sarah felt her face flush, uncomfortable with the attention but grateful for the recognition. The group dispersed slowly as darkness fell. Sarah packed her gear carefully, her muscles beginning to stiffen from the day's ordeal. She would be sore tomorrow, covered in bruises from the fall. But she had done it. She had faced the challenge and conquered it. Rita walked over as Sarah shouldered her pack. "A few of us are going to the diner in town to celebrate surviving today. You should come." Sarah hesitated. She usually kept to herself, not wanting to intrude on the tight groups that had formed over months of training. But Rita's invitation seemed genuine. "I look like I got in a fight with a mountain," Sarah said, gesturing to her battered appearance. Rita laughed. "You did, and you won. That's exactly why you should come. First round's on me." Sarah smiled, a real smile that felt good after the tension of the day. "Okay, I'll meet you there." At the diner, a small group gathered in a back booth. Rita, Marcus Lee, and 3 other candidates made room for Sarah. The conversation flowed easily, ranging from the day's challenges to stories of climbing adventures and rescue training mishaps. For the first time in 6 months, Sarah felt like part of the team rather than an outsider. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus Lee said during a lull in conversation. "How did you control that fall? I've seen people drop 5 feet and break bones. You fell 40 and climbed right back up." Sarah sipped her coffee, gathering her thoughts. "My dad taught me. He was a mountain rescuer for 20 years before an avalanche took him. When I was learning to climb, he made sure I knew how to fall properly. Keep loose, try to land on angled surfaces instead of flat ones. Use arms and legs to absorb impact in stages rather than all at once. When Jake tripped me, instinct kicked in. I stayed loose, hit the sloped wall instead of free-falling to the bottom, and rolled with the momentum." The table went quiet for a moment. "Your dad would be proud of today," Rita said softly. Sarah's eyes grew moist. "Yeah, I think he would be." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Sarah's mind drifted to her father's memory. She pictured him standing at the canyon's edge, watching her climb. His voice in her head had guided her up that wall, just as it had guided her through every challenge in this program. The evening wound down, and the group dispersed to their various accommodations. Sarah drove back to her small apartment, every movement stiff and sore. She barely made it through the door before exhaustion hit her. She showered carefully, wincing as water hit her scrapes, then collapsed into bed. Sleep came quickly, deep and dreamless. Her body demanded rest to heal from the day's trauma. But even in sleep, part of her mind was already focused on what came next. The certification program had 2 weeks remaining. The challenges would only get harder. Morning arrived too soon. Sarah's alarm chirped at 5:30, same as every day. She groaned and sat up, her body screaming in protest. Every muscle ached. The bruises on her side and legs had bloomed into spectacular purple and yellow patches. The cut on her forehead throbbed. She stood carefully and made her way to the mirror. The face looking back showed the toll of yesterday. Bruised, scraped, bandaged, but alive, and still determined. Sarah went through her morning routine on autopilot. Hot shower to loosen stiff muscles. Careful rebandaging of her hands. Ibuprofen for the pain. Strong coffee to wake up her foggy brain. She pulled on her training clothes gingerly, every movement a reminder of yesterday's fall. The drive to the training facility seemed longer than usual. Her hands gripped the steering wheel carefully, the bandages making her grip awkward. Part of her wanted to call in sick, take a day to recover. But she knew that would give ammunition to anyone who still doubted her. She had to show up, had to prove yesterday wasn't a fluke. The parking lot was half empty when she arrived. Several candidates had dropped out after the canyon challenge, their nerves shattered by watching Sarah's fall or by their own struggles on the wall. The remaining group was smaller, harder, more serious. Marcus Webb stood near the training office reviewing paperwork. He looked up as Sarah approached and did a double-take at her battered appearance. "Chen, didn't expect to see you today," he admitted. "Most people would take time to recover after yesterday." "I'm fine," Sarah said, though her body disagreed loudly. "What's today's training?" The instructor studied her for a long moment, then nodded with what might have been respect. "Wilderness navigation and emergency shelter building. Less physical than yesterday. Your hands going to hold up?" Sarah flexed her bandaged fingers experimentally. "They'll work." "All right then. Report to Sector B at 0700 with the others." The day's training proved challenging in different ways. Navigation required precision and mental focus. Building emergency shelters demanded coordination and technique. Sarah's small size actually helped in constructing compact, efficient shelters. Her injured hands slowed her down, but she adapted, using different grips and techniques to compensate. Rita worked alongside her for part of the day, the two of them building a snow cave shelter in the wooded training area. They worked well together, Rita's height useful for reaching high branches, while Sarah's smaller frame let her work inside the shelter structure efficiently. "You've got everyone talking," Rita said as they packed snow to reinforce a wall. "The story's spreading beyond our group. Some of the instructor candidates came by just to see the woman who free-climbed out of the canyon after being pushed." Sarah frowned. She didn't want fame or attention. She just wanted to complete her certification and start working real rescues. "Jake's apparently facing criminal charges," Rita continued. "Reckless endangerment or something. His lawyer's arguing it was an accident, but with multiple witnesses saying otherwise, it's not looking good for him." "I'm not pressing charges," Sarah said quietly. Rita stopped working and stared at her. "Why not? He tried to kill you." "He tried to humiliate me," Sarah corrected. "He didn't think I'd actually fall, just stumble. He's already lost his certification and his reputation. That's enough." "You're more forgiving than I'd be." Sarah shrugged, then winced at the pain the movement caused. "My dad used to say carrying anger is like carrying rocks up a mountain. It just weighs you down. Jake's mistake cost him everything he worked for. I don't need revenge. I need to finish this program." The 2 weeks that followed tested every candidate in different ways. They practiced helicopter rescues, hanging from cables while simulating evacuations. They learned advanced first aid in wilderness conditions. They trained in winter survival techniques and avalanche rescue protocols. Each day brought new challenges, new skills to master. Sarah performed consistently well, her earlier demonstration earning her respect from both candidates and instructors. People asked her advice on climbing techniques. They studied her methods during practice drills. The quiet outsider had become someone others looked to. Derek and Marcus Volt, Jake's former friends, kept their distance initially. But gradually they approached Sarah with grudging apologies. They had been wrong to doubt her, Wrong to mock her. Their words were awkward but genuine. We were jerks, Derek admitted one afternoon during a break. We judged you without giving you a chance. What you did at that canyon, that was real skill. I'm sorry. Sarah accepted the apology simply. Holding grudges took energy she needed for training. Besides, she understood their perspective even if she disagreed with it. Mountain rescue had been dominated by large, strong men for decades. She was different, and different scared people sometimes. The final evaluation arrived on a gray, cold morning in late November. The remaining 15 candidates assembled at dawn, breath misting in the freezing air. This was the ultimate test, combining everything they had learned over 6 months. The scenario was brutal in its realism. A simulated avalanche had trapped multiple victims at various points on a mountainside. Candidates had to work in teams to locate victims with avalanche beacons, dig them out, provide emergency medical care, and evacuate them to safety, all while dealing with unstable snow conditions, time pressure, and equipment challenges. Marcus Webb divided them into 3 teams of 5. Sarah found herself grouped with Rita, Marcus Lee, Derek, and a quiet woman named Jennifer, who specialized in emergency medicine. It was a strong team with diverse skills. You have 2 hours, Webb announced, his voice cutting through the cold wind. The clock starts when I fire this flare. Victims have medical conditions that will deteriorate. Every minute counts. This is pass or fail. No do-overs. The flare shot into the gray sky and chaos erupted. Sarah's team sprinted toward their assigned sector, avalanche beacons in hand. The devices beeped urgently, guiding them toward buried transmitters that represented trapped victims. Sarah took the lead in reading the terrain, identifying safe paths and dangerous areas. Snow's unstable there, she called out, pointing to a sloped section. We go around, approach from the side. Marcus Lee questioned the longer route, but Rita backed Sarah's call. They detoured and reached the first victim's beacon without incident. Behind them, they heard a sharp crack as the unstable section Sarah had identified released a small slide. If they had gone that way, they would have been caught. Good call, Marcus Lee said with newfound respect. They dug furiously, shoveling snow until they reached the first dummy victim. Jennifer assessed the simulated injuries while the others continued searching for the second victim. Time ticked away relentlessly. Sarah's small size became an advantage again. She could work in the tight confines of the dig site more easily than the larger team members. Her efficient movements conserved energy while making steady progress. Second victim located, Derek called from 30 yards away. Beacon strong here. The team split, Sarah and Jennifer staying with victim 1 while the others went for victim 2. Sarah helped Jennifer package the victim for transport using the techniques they had drilled for months. Every strap had to be secure. Every injury had to be stabilized. They worked together like a practice team. Sarah's steady hands prepared equipment while Jennifer made treatment decisions. When the medical work was done, they rigged a sled to transport the victim downslope. Ready for evac, Jennifer called on the radio. The 2 groups reunited, each with a secured victim. But they had burned precious time. The clock showed 90 minutes gone. They had 30 minutes to get both victims to the evacuation point at the base of the slope. We'll never make it pulling these sleds in deep snow, Marcus Lee said, worry creeping into his voice. Yes, we will, Sarah countered. We use the ridge line. Snow's thinner there, more stable. It's longer distance, but we can move faster. That ridge is exposed, Derek argued. If weather turns bad, then we move fast, Sarah interrupted. We don't have time to debate, trust me. The team looked at each other, then nodded. They had seen what Sarah could do. They trusted her judgment. The ridge route was brutal but effective. The team moved in rotation, fresh members taking over sled, pulling every few minutes. Sarah's turn came and her injured hands screamed in protest, but she pulled her weight without complaint. The bandages grew red with fresh blood, but she kept moving. 20 minutes left. The evacuation point came into view below them. They pushed harder, muscles burning, lungs gasping in the thin, cold air. 15 minutes. They reached the final slope down to the base. 10 minutes. They hit the evacuation point with both victims secured and all team members accounted for. Exhausted, but successful. Marcus Webb checked his stopwatch and nodded. Team 3, 1 hour 53 minutes. Both victims successfully evacuated. Well done. Sarah collapsed onto a snowbank, her chest heaving. Rita dropped beside her, grinning despite her exhaustion. The rest of the team celebrated with tired high fives and shoulder clasps. The other two teams finished within the time limit as well, though one team lost points for improper victim securing. When all candidates had completed the final test, the instructors gathered them for the results. You've all worked incredibly hard for 6 months, Marcus Webb began. This program breaks strong people. It reveals who has the skill, determination, and character to save lives in extreme conditions. Not everyone makes it through. He paused, letting the tension build. Everyone standing here today has earned certification. Congratulations. The group erupted in cheers and embraces. Sarah felt Rita hug her tightly. Then Marcus Lee, then even Derek. Months of stress and doubt and exhaustion released in that moment of triumph. Sarah looked up at the mountain peaks surrounding them. Her father had worked in mountains like these, saving lives until the day one took his. She had followed his path, faced doubt and danger, and proven she belonged here. The certification ceremony took place that evening in the town hall. Family and friends filled the seats. Sarah sat alone in the crowd initially, having no one to invite. Her mother had passed years ago and she had no siblings. But as the ceremony began, Rita slid into the seat beside her. "You're not sitting alone tonight," Rita said firmly. "You're part of this team now." One by one, the 15 successful candidates walked across the stage to receive their certification. When Marcus Webb called Sarah's name, the applause was thunderous. Her fellow candidates cheered loudly, several giving standing ovations. She accepted her certification from Webb, who shook her hand firmly. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "You've got his heart." Sarah felt tears threaten but held them back. She returned to her seat with the certification clutched in her hands. The official document represented 6 months of sacrifice, doubt overcome, and dreams achieved. After the ceremony, candidates and their families mingled at a reception. Sarah found herself surrounded by her team, all of them swapping stories and making plans for the future. Many had already received job offers from rescue services across the region. "What about you?" Rita asked. "Where are you going?" Sarah smiled. "Alpine County Mountain Rescue. Same team my father worked for. They have an opening and they called me last week." "That's perfect," Marcus Lee said warmly. "They're lucky to get you." The evening wound down slowly. Sarah stayed until the end, savoring these final moments with people who had become more than colleagues. They were her team now, brothers and sisters in a dangerous profession. Driving home that night, Sarah's mind drifted to her father. She pictured him standing on some snowy mountain peak, watching over her. "I made it, Dad," she whispered. "Just like you said I would. Size doesn't matter up there. Heart does." The following Monday, Sarah started her first day with Alpine County Mountain Rescue. The station was a sturdy building nestled in the mountains, its walls covered with photos of successful rescues and fallen team members. Her father's picture hung in the memorial section, forever young in his rescue gear. The team captain, a weathered woman named Susan Carter, showed Sarah around. "We've heard about you," Carter said with a slight smile. "The story of the canyon climb has made the rounds. That's the kind of skill and courage we need here." Sarah's first real rescue call came 3 days later. A hiker had fallen and broken her leg on a remote trail. The team mobilized quickly, Sarah among them. As the helicopter lifted off, she looked down at the mountains spreading below. This was it, the real work, the reason for 6 months of brutal training. Somewhere out there, someone needed help, and Sarah Chen was ready to answer that call. The helicopter circled the accident site. The terrain was steep and rocky, accessible only by technical climbing. Sarah volunteered immediately for the descent. She rappelled down the cliff face with practiced ease, her injured hands now healed and strong. She reached the injured hiker, a young woman in her 20s who was in shock and pain. Sarah spoke calmly, assessing injuries and providing comfort while she prepared the woman for transport. The technical rescue took hours, but Sarah never rushed, never showed doubt. She secured the victim properly, communicated clearly with her team, and executed the evacuation flawlessly. Back at the station that evening, Susan Carter pulled Sarah aside. "Excellent work today. Textbook rescue." Your father would have been impressed. "You knew him?" Sarah asked. 20 years ago, he pulled me out of an avalanche, saved my life. When I heard his daughter was going through certification, I made sure we had a spot for you." Carter's expression softened. "He talked about you all the time, said you were going to be a better climber than he ever was. I see now he was right." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. Her father's legacy lived on, not just in memories but in the lives saved by people he had rescued and trained. The weeks and months that followed brought more rescues. Some were routine, others terrifyingly dangerous. Sarah worked each one with the same careful competence she had shown at the canyon. Her small size continued to be an advantage in tight spaces and technical climbs. Her skill earned respect from veteran rescuers. 1 year after her certification, Sarah received a call from Marcus Webb. The training program wanted her to come back as an assistant instructor. They needed someone who could teach smaller candidates. That size wasn't a limitation. Sarah accepted immediately. Teaching the next generation felt like honoring her father's memory. On her first day back at the training facility, Sarah stood at the edge of that same canyon where she had fallen and climbed out a year ago. A new group of candidates watched nervously, preparing for their own test. Among them stood a small young man, barely 5'6", who reminded Sarah of herself. He looked terrified as larger candidates made jokes about his size. Sarah walked over to him. "First time free climbing?" she asked. He nodded, unable to speak. "Size doesn't matter up there," Sarah said, echoing her father's words. "Heart does. Technique does. Trust yourself and remember your training. The wall doesn't care how big you are. It only cares if you're smart enough to read it." The young man stared at her. Then recognition dawned. "You're Sarah Chen, the one who climbed out after falling." Sarah smiled. "That's right. And if I can do it, so can you. Now let me show you some techniques for small frame climbers." As she taught, Sarah realized she had finally found her place. Not despite her size, but embracing it as part of who she was. The doubters would always exist. There would always be people like Jake, unable to see past their prejudices. But there would also be people like Rita, and Marcus Lee, and Susan Carter, and her father, who understood that courage and skill came in all sizes. Sarah Chen stood at the canyon's edge, a certified mountain rescuer and now an instructor, ready to help the next generation discover their own strength. The mountains rose around her, beautiful and dangerous, calling to those brave enough to answer. And she was ready. She had always been ready. She just needed the chance to prove it. That evening, as the sun set over the training facility, Sarah drove home thinking about the journey that had brought her here. The 3 jobs she had worked to afford training. The months of doubt and mockery. The moment Jake pushed her and she fell into the canyon. The climb back up that changed everything. She wouldn't change any of it. Every challenge had forged her into who she was now. Every doubt had strengthened her resolve. Every fall had taught her how to rise again. Her apartment walls still displayed maps and rescue photos, but now her own certification hung among them. New photos showed her team at Alpine County, pictures from successful rescues, moments of triumph and camaraderie. Sarah made herself dinner and settled in to review training materials for the next day's instruction. Tomorrow she would teach navigation techniques. The day after, rope systems. Then avalanche awareness, wilderness first aid, helicopter operations. Each lesson would carry her father's wisdom and her own hard-won experience. She would train the next generation to be skilled, courageous, and ready for anything the mountains threw at them. A notification popped up on her phone. Rita was asking if Sarah wanted to join several former candidates for a climbing trip next weekend. Sarah smiled and texted back yes. She had started this journey alone, determined to prove herself. She had ended it surrounded by teammates who respected her skills and valued her friendship. That transformation was worth more than any certification. Sarah looked at her father's photo on the wall. He smiled back at her, forever frozen in time. She raised her coffee mug in a silent toast. I made it, Dad. Size didn't matter. Heart did. Just like you always said. Outside her window, the mountain stood dark against the starlit sky, full of danger and beauty and possibility. Somewhere out there, someone might need rescue tomorrow. And Sarah Chen would be ready to climb any wall, cross any canyon, face any challenge to bring them home safe. She had proven herself in the canyon that day. But more importantly, she had proven something to herself. She was exactly who she needed to be. Strong enough, skilled enough, brave enough. The doubters had laughed when they pushed her. They had expected her to fail. Instead, she had climbed back up, without ropes, without help, on her own strength and skill. And she would keep climbing. Always.